Is everybody staying? There's so many of y'all.
Yeah.
Usually when I start talking, people run out. This is weird. All right, can y'all see from back there, I hope? Do you want any lights dimmed? Or is it good? All right. So what we're going to talk about today is the methods to train new behaviors. And I'll just touch on each of these, but mostly we'll spend our time talking about shaping. And what did I do with them? I brought a couple of examples of shaping plans. I didn't make copies for everybody because that just seemed like a waste of paper. But I brought a couple of examples as we start talking about shaping. If you're not familiar with what shaping plans look like or you haven't seen very many, these are just a few examples. There's a present for injection for an elephant in the shoulder. There's a polar bear blood draw. And sub-Q injection of a lemur, and voluntary blood draw on an elephant. Oh well. So anyway, there's these. I'll just sort of set them out here, send them around. Y'all can have a look at them. And they should be available through the training committee, other sorts of shaping plans as well. So those are just a couple of examples as we start talking about it. But I kind of want to just go over these different ways of training new behaviors and put it out there as food for thought. And what we'll do today is kind of the lecture part of it, and then tomorrow is the activity and eating part of the exercise. I'll just leave it at that for now. So the methods that we're going to discuss are modeling, distraction, social learning, bribing or baiting, capturing, and shaping. All right, so modeling. What does modeling mean? This is when you take the animal's body and actually physically move it into a position. So if you want a bird to do an open wing, you might take that wing and actually help the bird make the movement by opening up the wing. And one of the things that I want to do is kind of look at the drawbacks and benefits of each of the techniques so that you can be thinking about them, because they all might work to some degree. Some are going to be more effective. Some are going to have less risks. Some might be quicker but come with more risks. So I think it's important to balance the costs and benefits of each of the techniques. And for those of you that have started pursuing the levels, there is some discussion about, well, what if this happens? Which would be the best technique to use? So I hope this sort of supports what you're doing through the training committee and levels as well. But with modeling, probably the biggest benefit is that the animal learns to relax as you manipulate its body. The drawback is they don't learn to make the movement on their own. And it may pertain to that one body part, so it may not generalize very well. So, yeah, that's what it is. I think I said a couple of these, the risks that are involved with this technique are the animals really not learning to make the move. You, as the person who's manipulating the animal, may be at risk if they decide they don't like that manipulation and they turn around and, tag you somehow. So there are some risks associated with that. And I'm also realizing that I probably should, I don't know if we have all of this, I can't remember because I do so many of these, if it's in your handouts for training committee. Does any of you training committee people remember? Do we have these things in there yet? The disadvantages and advantages?
I don't think we had the specifics yet.
Okay.
I don't think we had this out.
Can we check and get back to you later?
Yeah, and it might be, if we need it, that's easy just to print it out and put it in there. It's always a work in progress. Okay, so that's kind of modeling in a nutshell. I'm just going to go through these quickly. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. The second technique is something that I call distraction, and essentially what this means is just giving the animal, usually food or something to kind of take their mind off of whatever you're doing. So you want the sea lion to go in the box. You give it food down at the end of the box so you can close the door. So basically, the animal's not really paying attention to what you're doing while you do it, and they're distracted enough by the food. So, again, if you're going to be so sorry you sat right here. Do you love your Coke so much? So I want to give an injection, right? I'm like giving her Coke, which she loves very much, and I go stab. and give her the injection. So that's basically what I mean by distraction. Here, we have no sound. There you go. She's manipulating the bear's fur, prepping the bear for an injection in the shoulder, giving lots of food. The idea is the bear's getting something really sweet and tasty, and again, perhaps not paying too much attention to what's happening. Some advantages with this technique, especially if you have an animal that's quite comfortable with you and kind of taking food from you, really food motivated, those sorts of things help if you're using this technique. The advantage is sometimes you can get to a procedure quite quickly, particularly if you have to do an injection or something like that you just kind of need a quick in and out. You might be able to distract the animal sufficiently to achieve that objective pretty quickly. The disadvantages I think are real and significant and absolutely must be considered. They involve things like the animal may not trust you. Okay, you gave me that delicious coat and then you stabbed me with a needle and I wasn't exactly expecting that to come. And if you compare that to desensitization, where you're training the animal every single step and they understand the steps and they're accepting each of the steps, I think you can kind of see the difference and where that might startle the animal a little bit. And if it does startle them and they don't trust you, you may have significant regression that then you have to come back from. Now, if you're only doing a procedure once a year, like a vaccination or something, maybe it ends up not being that big of a deal, but there may also be a cumulative effect over time. Or if you have something that, you have to give an injection more than once a year, you don't have time to come back from that regression, if that makes sense. So that's probably the biggest drawback. I've also seen where animals seem to cooperate and they're distracted over, some period of time, and then all of a sudden they go, wait a second, I've about had enough of that. What you have is no longer good enough. And then you're not starting at the 0 point, like if you had started desense, kind of from a neutral point, you're actually starting from that point of regression. So that's a drawback again. Social learning is just when animals, there's different types of social learning, but in general what we're talking about is when one animal sees another one doing something and begins to mimic or copy it. So they're learning, there's some observational learning that's going on there. And I think you would be hard pressed to train like an injection or blood draw or something like that strictly with social learning. But what we have seen, particularly with chimps, we actually tested this, was looking at urine collection and how much quicker they learned when they observed other chimps not only urinating on cue, but then receiving the positive reinforcement. That was an important part for the chimps. They had to see that, oh, you get paid for doing this. And then we saw a significant increase in the rate at which they learned to do the behavior. So it can really help move things along, but it may not get you from point A to point Z as a standalone thing. But there's plenty of stories about baby killer whales learning to do the entire show by following mom around. So things like that. But probably not so much if it's a painful or scary thing. So this lady, the one on the right is being trained for toothbrushing, obviously. If you watch her. How about me? Okay, yeah.
I just have an anecdote about social learning. We finally got our scale for the giraffe. Our oldest female would go on, and she was very confident, and a second female would also go on, and we would weigh her. And when our first female passed away, it took me a year to get the second female back on the scale. So it was kind of it was a huge eye-opener how much she was relying on her social learning to kind of be like, okay, I can only do it because I see my friend do it and she's fine and everything's okay. And once that friend wasn't there anymore, it was almost a year until she would go back on without someone before her. So, I mean, again, like, it's a scary situation and she needed that every time. And it was true. I mean, she wouldn't even step on it when there wasn't the other female. So it was going back all the way from you've never done this before, let's start from ground zero.
Wow, from being able to completely do it with somebody
Yeah,
else there.
with 11
So
months.
not only social learning, but the confidence of
Mhm.
having maybe a leader, more dominant.
Yeah, and they had a close
Comfort.
relationship, so, I mean, it was something that was, I mean, we kind of assumed that, you know, oh, it helps that she can see Tiki do it, that's so great. And then Tiki was there anymore, and she's like, no, no thank you. And they're like, oh, okay.
That's pretty, well, leave it to
Yeah.
Giraffe for the drama, or the fear. Cool. Okay, next technique, bribing. I hope everybody has a general sense of what this means, but you know, essentially when you use a bribe to elicit a behavior, you can have the exact same food or whatever that you're using for the bribe and for the reinforcement, but when you present it is what makes the difference. So you present the food bit to initiate some sort of action from the animal, whereas reinforcement is presented in conjunction with the animal doing the correct behavior, not in order to elicit that behavioral response. So it's really a matter of timing. Again, with the coat, if I want you to come over here, I can put the coat down and say, okay, go get your Coke, and you move over to get it. Or if I'm reinforcing it, I say, hey, come here. When you do, I hopefully bridge and then get the reinforcement. So it's just a difference in timing, but the exact same thing can be used for that. So bribing actually can be, is Colleen here? I know she's probably shuddering when I'm even saying this, but bribing can be an appropriate way to train a new behavior, but you have to do it with some sort of plan to eliminate the bribe. Because most animals are a lot smarter, well, I don't know about y'all, but most animals are a lot smarter than I am, and they will outsmart you and create kind of a dependency on bribing if you're not careful. So if you use a bribe, you know, hi, I'm Margaret, I bribe, admit what you're doing, and then make sure you have a plan to eliminate that bribe. So you're going to put the bribe down in a way that elicits the behavioral response. Use cues right from the beginning. So have a verbal cue and maybe a physical cue. Again, if you want the animal to shift from one place to another, you put the bribe down and you say over. So you're right from the beginning in teaching them the word over and the hand cue that goes with it. And then you want to go ahead and use your bridge and reinforcement when they make the proper move. So yes, they're moving for the bribe, but you're also using those cues and your reinforcement. And I find it really helpful to reinforce with something that's, you know, better, higher magnitude than the bribe. Because if you start off with your really great thing for the bribe, and then you reinforce with something that's kind of okay, I think it's much more difficult to eliminate that bribe. But if you can start off with bribing with something that's good enough to get the animal to move, but then reinforce with something that's really tasty, it's easier to eliminate it. Open mouth is one that I know a lot of you have done this. We typically will train using some sort of bribe, so you hold the food up. In this case, the bottle of juice is being used for the chimp, and we'll do the hand signal right in association with the bribe. So from the beginning, you know, they're seeing open associated with the food being there. This was trying to teach the bats. This was one of the iterations that we used here. Trying to teach the bats to move on to this sort of net platform thing that could be used to take them for weighing or moving them to a different location. But you can see the food in the syringe is being used to encourage them to move on to this rather bizarre device. That turned out to not be the greatest thing because of the netting. So this elephant's just learning to move backwards. You'll see the food is tossed between his legs and he's told back. And the hand signal is this. And then when you move to eliminating eliminating the bribe, you'll see how the hand signal sort of comes from tossing the food. And the reason that I want to show you these two videos is because I do think it's important that you understand how cues emerge. With the backup, it's really easy because you're throwing the food and saying back, and then it's easy to not throw the food and say back. And when you're initially moving away from using a bribe, so in this example, the elephant one, when the elephant takes one step back, the first time I don't throw food, I might bridge and reinforce that. With the bribe, she had been moving back 10 steps, let's say. But now the first time I eliminate that bribe, that's significant to the animal. And you want to reinforce any movement they make without the bribe. And that's how you kind of move past having the bribe. If you're expecting them to do 10 steps back because that's what they did when a hunk of bread flew between their legs, and now there's no hunk of bread, you might want to just think about bridging and reinforcing those initial movements. And then approximate back to bigger and bigger movements. So again, open mouth with the bear and the food. She's got that biscuit right between her fingers, you can see there. And this bear was doing so well with this behavior that during this same session, we kind of said, hey, how about if you just try it without the food in your hand? And the bear did it perfectly. So if you're using bribes to get animals to do behaviors, think about how you can eliminate it. Again, here's another. So the otter example, this is one of them here. So using the food, and you can see the hand signal. And sometimes the timing is really quick. The one that you'll be able to see is coming up. Okay, watch the timing, listen for the bridge. This is without the bribe. Alright, any questions so far? Kind of trying to get through to the shaping stuff. If I'm going too fast, let me know. Okay, capturing. Capturing involves when you see an animal do a behavior, you reinforce it. When you're using capturing, again, like bribing, you want to assign a cue as early as possible so that, again, the animal's hearing and seeing that cue in association with doing the behavior and getting reinforced. With capturing, sometimes it can happen really quickly. And of course, there are some behaviors that are really difficult to actually shape through lots of small steps. And those include things like training an animal to urinate on cue or vocalize or something like that. So you really can only capture them. With the urine collection, you might do things to help you get that behavior. We did a huge study with chimpanzees and cynomolgus monkeys, crab-eating macaques, that we had to collect urine. It was something like 38 chimps and 36 little old lady macaques, and they had to be trained for urine collection. And it was quite an interesting experiment in training so many animals to urinate on cue. And we would do things like gallons, liters of dilute juice for the chimpanzees, hoping that they would urinate within a reasonable time frame. And some of them would sit there for literally hours. Because again, you can't squeeze them, there's nothing you can do to make that first drop come out so that you can reinforce. You literally have to sit and wait for it to happen, and then, yay, good pee, or whatever you're saying, so that they can begin to put two and two together. But quite a large learning spread in how they learn. Some learn very quickly, some literally took months to learn. Anteater, pea brain kind of animal, learned to pee on command really quickly. This female, this is at the Singapore Zoo, and she loved to be, misted. That was part of her day. It was good for her health, keep the nice high humidity where it's so low in Singapore most of the time. Try to, keep her nice and wet, which she really liked. And the keeper noticed that every time he would mist her, she would begin to urinate. So he thought, well, hey, maybe I can just capture this. So here you see that's the collection cup in use down there. And so he would come out with the sprayer and begin to spray her, and he always had that stick in his hand. And over time, the sprayer was eliminated, and just the visual of that stick was enough to cause her to urinate. So he could collect a nice clean sample anytime. And again, some of those lovely chimpanzees. So she's told go pee is the cue. She's positioned in such a way that you can easily collect the urine sample. And you give the cue and then basically wait. Of course, she has to be desensitized to that wand going underneath her. Once the behavior's trained, it's really time-saving if you have to collect regular urine samples on any animals. And again, if you have them trained for the wand to go underneath them, you don't have to put a pan in and wait for them to pee over the pan. You hope not necessarily require social isolation. Social isolation. Isolation. My God. They don't have to be alone. So there's a lot of benefits to taking the time doing it if it doesn't take lots and lots and lots and lots. Here's another capture. This is vocalization on a hyena. This is being told laugh. All right, disadvantages of capturing, and they are real. When regression occurs, you don't have lots of baby steps that you can retrace. You essentially have to wait for the animal to do the behavior again, and you sort of hope that you can replicate whatever conditions resulted in the animal doing the behavior. If you have difficulty replicating those conditions, or the animal doesn't see that they're being replicated, they may not present the behavior to you, and that can be frustrating for the animal because they're not getting reinforced, and for the trainer because you're not getting reinforced with the animal doing the behavior. So it can be really frustrating. I also see with capturing that the behavior can be quite intimately tied to the location or some other really specific situation and orientation, maybe a position on the fence line if you're working on an animal positioning a certain way, or if you only work the behavior in a specific location, then it becomes, because it's convenient, then it becomes really tied to that location and it's difficult to move to other places. So that's a real risk, is trying to generalize it to different places. Body part training, and I've seen this a lot with great apes or primates in particular, like if you teach one side, arm, then the animal should easily be able to learn the other side. But if the animal's been sitting against the cage like this and you've said arm, 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 and bridged them for presenting their arm up against the mesh, but maybe they haven't actually learned to bring the arm forward, then when you go to reach for this arm, they haven't learned to make a movement, you've just captured it. So they don't generalize it, they don't just go, oh yeah, here's this one. Even for a super smart animal, like a chimp or orangutan or something. So you do need to be careful because there isn't that learning to learn that happens with the shaping process. So if you've trained a body part by capturing it, I guess don't just assume that you're going to be able to ask for the other side and the animal automatically gets it. They might, but you can't count on it. This orangutan, that's the keeper. It's like he does the left arm or whichever arm, or perhaps it's the right one since it's there. Anyway, whichever arm he did really well. And she was so frustrated because she couldn't get him to do the other arm. Like, well, he knows that one, why won't he do the other one? And so upon discussing how she had trained the one arm that he did, it turns out she captured it, and he didn't have that, that foundation to learn to present the other one. Okay. Yes.
Regarding urine collection, capturing, I don't know where I read it or heard it, but when you bridge, should you bridge at the end or partway through, or is there a pro con to any of it?
I think that's really, to me, that's going to depend on where in the process you are. So if you're trying to reinforce latency, you ask for pee, a drop comes out, I bridge that. Because again, I've had so much where you're just sitting and waiting for urine for so long. Some of us dream about it sometimes. So it depends on what aspect of the behavior you want to reinforce. If you want to reinforce a quick response, then you might bridge straight away. If you want to reinforce continued urination, you might bridge multiple times throughout it. If the behavior is well and plenty trained, you can put the wand underneath them, you can say go pee, well, actually I would say go pee first, and then put the wand under when it starts happening. You might be able to wait until further into the process. So to me, it really depends on what part of the behavior, and that's where you move from capturing, which I'll talk about kind of in the end, but you're going to capture the initial response in urinating, but then how you shape the behavior over time becomes more of a shaping process. Do you want more? Do you want a reduced latency? You want a quicker response to your cue? Those are the parts that then you're going to use selective reinforcement to start identifying, yes, that's what I want. Now this time, this is the part of the behavior that I want. Does that help or make it more confusing?
Mm-hmm. There's like multiple phases to the urine
Yes.
collection. And so
Yes.
initial phase may be different, your bridging timing and like that.
Yeah, and with these shaping plans, actually, I should have printed out a urine collection one. With the shaping plans, some of them have like training insights, which is just things that we found. Usually my friend Jane, who we've trained lots of chimpanzees together, she and I often put in these training insights in our shaping plans. So it's just kind of like little points like that, pointers. But some of them have different parts of the behavior identified. So you may have like, what is this? Sub-Q on a lemur. So training the side present and then injection descends, but you may have different parts of the behavior, and I think it's really good when you're learning to write shaping plans and thinking about behaviors in these small steps, that you learn to think of the different components of the behavior. Even something that seems kind of straightforward like an injection, there's the feeling of the skin being pierced. Well, first there's presenting your body part and holding it for the proper amount of time. And then there's the feeling of having your skin pierced, and if you want to include the feeling of having a liquid, injected, and there's the feeling of holding for duration. So there's all different components of this one behavior that you can sort of tease out and begin to train each aspect and then put them together in different combinations. And I think that's a really critical part of shaping to consider. It's not a linear progression. Behaviors don't happen in step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 always in the same order. That's why I like thinking about the different components of a behavior, and then you train up this bit of component and this bit, and then how you start putting them together may be based on the individual animal's response, what you actually need, but usually what the animal's tolerating and where you need to spend more or less time. So that's where shaping is really our most powerful and successful method of training new behavior, and it has a lot of staying power because you do break behaviors down into these small steps that are called successive approximations, and each of those small steps build towards your final product. Each time the animal repeats those initial steps, or once they're on step 5, each time they repeat the previous step to the next one, it just becomes stronger and stronger. And that's the staying power. We all learn through repetition. Very few of us, Sheldon, I guess, hears something once and we can regurgitate it back. But most of us don't learn that way. We have to hear things multiple times. We may have to hear things presented in a different manner. You read it, you hear it, you see it, you smell it, whatever it is. We all are taking in all this information in different ways to help us learn. And animals are the same way. We have to give them multiple opportunities. And so shaping is really helpful for that. And there's only a history of positive reinforcement associated with the shaping process. So it should have strength just in the fact that it's associated with something good rather than something terrible. And generalization will often happen in a way that it doesn't necessarily happen with capturing, and I'll give you some examples of that. And we always say start off in kindergarten, because when you learn to learn, it's easier to learn something harder. And you kind of learn to study as you progress through whatever education you have. Everybody read Karen Pryor's Don't Shoot the Dog? I think the most important take-home of the book to me are the 10 laws of shaping. And I know y'all have heard me say this before. I am sort of a law-abiding citizen, but I prefer guidelines. And so, raise the criteria in small increments. This just means have small enough steps in your shaping plan that the animal can tolerate it. If you go too quickly, then you may confuse the animal or blow them out of the water and they just can't follow along with you. So it's much better to have lots and lots of small steps, and maybe you feel great one day because you make it from step 1 to 10 in one day because you had such nice small steps. But the animal must be able to sort of follow along with all of those really small steps. So more small steps are better than big giant ones. This is kind of what I was talking about with looking at the different components of the behavior. You don't want to mix everything up. So if you think about, oh, I need the animal to do this, and this, and this, and then I'll begin to put them together, that way they can learn each different aspect. If you give them too much different things to learn at once, it can be quite confusing. And you wouldn't necessarily want to, again, just going back to the injection or any kind of needle work, you don't want to increase the needle part of it, say piercing the animal's skin for the first time, and do your first step of 10-second duration. So you want to train needle stick and duration as 2 separate things and then put them together. And this is the one that I don't really pay attention to. It's putting the step on a variable schedule before moving on. I've not found that necessary. So I'm just going to skip over it. If anybody wants to talk about it, we can. At the end, when we're done with everything else. Again, let's go back to the needle example. You've been doing, say, 20-second duration with your blunt needle. You're ready to stick for the first time. You're not going to stick and expect 20-second or even 10-second duration. You're probably going to stick and come right back out. No duration at all. I'm relaxing the criteria of duration because I'm adding in this new thing that I know hurts, and it's probably going to startle the animal a little bit. And then you build duration back up. Stay ahead of your subject, essentially have a plan. If you don't have a plan, if you haven't at least made the effort to think through these small steps, how can you help the animal move through them? So it's really good to have a shaping plan, have an idea in your head, know the equipment that you need, the steps you want to take, think about your reinforcers. You may think, oh, the first time I put the needle in the animal's body, yeah, that's probably going to hurt. I should be prepared to jackpot. And you should always be prepared to jackpot. You don't necessarily have to do it. But have a plan, otherwise the animal's likely to be confused. Those of you that have played the training game, if you've played it with me or hopefully anyone else, they've asked you what your plan is. It doesn't matter if you walk around the table this way or that way or go down this side of the room or that side of the room. But when we ask you that question during the training game, it's this: what is your plan? Because if your animal comes walking in the room and they need to be over there, but they're moving around over here and you say, oh, okay, yeah, good for going this way. But then they start turning this way and you say, oh, okay, well, good for going that way. Now they're confused. They're all over the place. I got reinforced here and here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So the idea is pick kind of one pathway, give it a fair chance to succeed. If you need to tweak your shaping plan, of course you can. It's not written in stone, but give your first shaping plan a fair chance to succeed, which is going to be another one later on. That one. Okay, we already covered that one. Whoa, oh, that's better. One primary trainer or one person per new behavior. Consistency, as you know, is absolutely critical. It's hard enough to be consistent with yourself. If you have a whole bunch of people trying to do the same thing, even if they try really hard, they're likely to do it a little bit differently. So if you can, one person per new behavior, If you need a team of people, you may have the same 2 people that can work together, but if you have to rotate one of those, you could say you're doing an injection, or a blood draw or something else, you want to decide which person's going to be consistent and try to keep that one person consistent, and they become the primary trainer and the other person is helping out.
Yeah, I have a question about that one. So I get having one primary trainer train a new behavior for that animal, but can you have multiple trainers training different new behaviors at the same time?
Yes.
As long as you're sticking to like the behavior you're personally training? So an
Yes.
animal can learn like 5 new behaviors at once as long as there's 5 different people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The drawback is, do we all get enough time to work with that animal to make progress? If it truly was 5 new behaviors, that's a lot. Depending on the animal, 3.
I like to exaggerate, so
Okay, I can do 100. Yeah, you absolutely, you can have, you might be training sit and I'm training paw present. And we can both work on those in the same week. But you're gonna do your behavior, I'm gonna do mine. When my behavior's finished and trained, I'm gonna transfer it to you. Yeah.
And kind of on that same, if you have 2 behaviors that are almost similar in the same location of a body part or similar cue, like would you not want to try to train those at the same time by 2 different trainers because that could muddle up?
Yes, I think that's a great question. And if the behaviors are really similar, if you absolutely had to train them at the same time, I would do it with 2 different people. That way it's not so confusing that me, Margaret, is poking at the shoulder and the elbow, because those are really close. So if you did the shoulder and I did the elbow, that's a little bit less confusing for the animal, if we had to do that. Otherwise, I would try to make them different. And then, do the shoulder, get that one done, and then do the elbow. Yeah, essentially you're talking about setting the animal up for success. If what you're doing might confuse it, see if you can avoid doing that, because you don't want to start them off confused. Yeah, I don't know if, does anyone have any questions? Don't interrupt a training session gratuitously. Again, that may feel like a timeout to the really always use the example of your phone ringing or your radio going off and you turn around to talk on your phone. You've just turned your back on the animal. So really becomes think about how your behavior affects the animal. Everything you do communicates something to that animal. So what are you communicating, and are you communicating what you want to communicate? And yeah, try to end things on a positive note. In the shaping process, if you were hoping to get to step 7 today and the animal just can't quite get there, go back to step 6 and finish on a happy note, rather than like, oh, I couldn't get to 7, I give up and go home. Oh, good golly. Okay. All right, so, targets are going to be one of our key tools in the shaping process. Targets do lots of things. They're just fun for cute dogs. But obviously you can use these to shape and train behavior, position animals in all different ways. They're associated only with positive reinforcement, so they have no negative connotation. They enhance your safety, the animal's safety, equipment safety. The same exact target can be used to cue and train multiple behaviors just by having the animal follow, in this case, the nose target. You see the target and the hand signal is being used to train a down. Fingers are a good reinforcer. I cringed a little bit too. Targets can be used to, as a great and compatible behavior. In this case, teaching, something with the ability to grab you or equipment. The gorilla holds on to 2 targets, makes it safer to, say, touch his abdomen or present an ultrasound wand to the abdomen. So, they can help with safety. In this case, Lisa's doing blood draw, which for those of you who know, she really doesn't love too much. And the target stays on her ear, which keeps her from flapping her ear as much. Gives her that nice solid point of reference. She's also gets scratched a little bit with the target, which I think she liked some. And that makes it, and so this is safe for her because once the needle's in her ear, if she starts flapping her ear around, that's gonna hurt. Once the needle's in and the animal holds still, it doesn't really hurt so much. Lisa may have a different opinion about that. So you can see the target's used to really give pretty good duration, a little, like I said, a little bit of scratching on the ear during the procedure. But do be careful what you do with targets. I think some of you may have seen this video before. This was in China at a workshop, and we were teaching the giraffe to do A to B, which basically we say go, and the giraffe turns and walks away. But this giraffe is in its probably second day of training, and has learned the target, so knows how to touch the target. So he starts off by asking for target. And then see the target up here, you'll see it like flop around every now and again. So he's holding the target and saying go. And the giraffe's like, wait, but I see that thing there. So yeah, we said, okay, put the target down and then ask the giraffe to go. So just, again, think about what you're doing. You know, this is an animal that's brand new to training, has just been heavily reinforced for touching the target, and now you're holding the target and saying go. That thing's there, I want to stay and touch it. So again, just, it's a powerful tool. Just think about how you're using it and what you're doing with it. When you start off targeting, you may see animals that are curious and interested in the targets and just immediately move forward to have a look at it, as was the case with this freshwater ray. That was one of the stranger reactions that I've seen to target. Super calm, touched it, and then like, oh my God, what just happened? And he freaked out.
And heard the whistle before?
And then he got scared and started doing his abnormal behavior.
My question is, had he heard the whistle before?
Yeah, he'd been trained on the bridge.
Because it almost seemed like the whistle was startling.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he'd been trained on the bridge. He seemed to be doing well with that. Yeah, and then we also believe that he had some vision problems, but it was weird because he just like touched it and then wah, and that persisted for days. That response, that was very weird. He's an ex-pet though. He was kind of weird, anyways. Or you may see aggression. So she's gonna pop at the target there, and she's in probably her 4th day of targeting. Started off super aggressive to the target. We reinforced it initially because at least she was coming towards it, and then began to, as you saw there, no longer reinforce for popping her head up at the target, but only for touching it nicely. So sometimes you see curiosity for the target, sometimes you see fear, which, yeah, that's not that unusual. And sometimes you see aggression, which I think is typically fear-based, and then you just kind of work through that, given whatever the animal's showing you. These are some steps in shaping a bear to go to the target. So again, the cue is go. And at first you can see there's hardly any, this is the target, there's hardly any distance between the bear and the target. And then you'll see the progression of moving the bear a little bit further. He also knows open mouth, which you'll see him trying.
About that.
So obviously he doesn't quite understand the go to the target yet. Now he's starting to move a little further, and the keeper's actually walking with him to help direct him. I love the raisin stuff. see he's going with just a couple of cues up there at the target. And tries to get on his own. Yeah. Okay, so do you have a question?
No.
Fixing your head.
Yeah, I was just fixing it.
So you're gonna hopefully use something called selective or differential reinforcement, and this is how you improve the quality of the behavior. So whatever you define as quality, again, it could be latency, it could be how high you lift your foot, how long you hold your shoulder against the mesh, whatever it might be. So define quality, and then this is how you improve the quality of the behavior. What's essential is that you no longer reinforce the lower quality of the behavior, otherwise the animal thinks they can do everything. So if you really want to push a behavior forward, then you need to start reinforcing small steps, yet still steps that are moving towards that better, whatever better is, and no longer reinforcing the lesser quality. And I think the biggest problem for many of us with this is, oh, but the animal's trying really hard. I don't want to not reinforce because then I feel bad. But again, if you're reinforcing everything, then that's what the animal's going to do. And behavior doesn't lie. You know, you can tell what's been reinforced and what hasn't. And if one of your colleagues is a real soft heart and reinforces the animal just because they tried, but maybe the behavior wasn't quite good enough, you're going to see that. So again, behavior doesn't lie. They're doing what they've been reinforced for doing, and we certainly can't blame an animal for that. So this is about us getting better and more attentive, and yeah, maybe a little stricter, but it's not like strict in a mean way. It's so that you can take better care of the animal, hopefully. So you're not just teaching them to spin around 6 times for fun. There should be a purpose. So she's teaching this monkey to present his foot. And what you'll see is she's just trying to capture it using the target, puts his hand on the stick. She bridged when he put the hand on the stick because his foot went on at the same time, but then it was like, oh, I don't want the hand and the foot, just the foot. So she waits, hand comes off, bridge, and then reinforce. So she's selecting the part of the behavior that's better than hand and foot on the target is just foot on the target. And this one is, the timing is really quick. It's a little bit hard to see. This drill is doing, mandrill is doing an open mouth behavior, looking for a slight bit of duration. So the timing has to be quick, and he's not a patient guy either. So she's saying open, hold. Actually, she could have bridged that one right there. It was a split second longer. And then he gets mad and he starts offering his other behaviors. There. So you can see how she's struggling a little bit to pick that right part of the behavior, that right little split second longer to reinforce.
I would think the presence of the juice bottle so close, he's like preparing to take in the juice, which requires, I don't know, closing the mouth at least part of the way. So would like eliminating that
It might help a lot, yeah.
duration at least.
And you notice there wasn't a hand signal right there with it. So yeah, I think that's an excellent point. One more reason to get that food out of their face. Yeah. Okay, any questions? Am I going too fast? I know a lot of you have probably heard a lot of this before. All right, so let's just take a look at some shaping steps for introducing a body target, a second target. In this case, this tiger's just being introduced to a hip target. So he doesn't know what it is yet. He doesn't know how to move into the hip target. He hasn't even been touched with it. It's just that initial, does the nose target, lift the hip target as she's saying hip, and bridge. So that would be your very first step of introducing a body target, is just basically presenting it to the animal. Then you might start to touch their body parts with the target, and again, they're associating the feeling of that thing touching them with the reinforcement. So that's for the hip target, just like with the tiger, only in this case we can reach in and touch the elephant at that stage. You know, the first stage again is to put them on the head target, lift the hip target, bridge and reinforce. Then put it in a little further, progressively, until you can touch the animal with it. Surprise! And once we can touch them, then we start looking for, you touch, move the target away, and look for any small movements towards that target. So a little warm up with the head target first. And then what you'll see in just a sec is she's actually going to touch him, pull that hip target away, and you'll see him take his first step towards the hip target. So there's the touch, move it away, and that. Okay, so it's a tiny, tiny little step, but that initial movement towards the target is what you build on. So then you're going to start looking for progressively bigger movements like that. And almost any of these behaviors that you've trained with targets, if you want to, can be converted to hand signals. I know a lot of you have different sorts of hand signals. And again, I think it's good to, just like with the bribing, understand where the cues came from. So all of these behaviors were trained with targets. So here, you can see the lean in, the one you were just seeing with the targets, the ear, touching the ear comes forward. So all of those cues came off of how the targets were initially presented. And this is important, particularly for those of you who are starting off in programs where animals are already really well trained, and all you know is that, oh, I lift my arm and they give me their hip. Well, do you know why you do that? Is that just because somebody told you to, or do you understand the mechanics of how that animal was trained? And not only, I think it's important to understand how the animal was trained, but if there's a breakdown in behavior, then you know kind of what to go back to. Or if you're training a new animal to do the behavior, it's helpful to know what's worked in the past. So I do think it's great if you can understand kind of where those behaviors came from. And like I was saying, you can see generalization happen much more easily when you've shaped the use of targets versus just capturing. So we didn't really have to train him for shoulder at all. He took a bit to train him. He was really scared of the head target, and then to train him on the hip target took, I don't know, a few days, I guess. And then the shoulder target, just literally touched him on the shoulder. He looked at it, did a couple of touches and bridges, and then touched it, moved him away, and he went, oh, is that what you want? And he immediately came right into it because he was beginning to generalize and understand the concept of body targets. All right, so this is just starting off foot target. You can see the tiger is not too keen on it. Lots of hissing and startling. Same thing with a bear. Just initially touching the foot. So of course we're going for this one, not the one he lifts.
Actually touch his paw too.
So touching and trying to bridge and reinforce just for the touch of that target.
Yes.
Oops. So small step, he moved his paw up a little bit more that time. I have no idea what this video is, but I assume we'll pop up. Okay, so you can kind of see the progression there, just the movement to a little bit more movement to a little bit more.
I'm just wondering for the head target, since that, I mean, you're just having that there to shape the behavior, so if you're touching the paw and he's looking down, his head's not at the head target, you can still reinforce. So like if he's supposed, the target is at the head and then you're asking for the paw, and he lifts the paw, but also his head is looking that direction.
Yeah, again, another great question. So one of the, and I'll show you some videos of this, but one of the advantages, particularly when you're trying to teach an animal to lift a foot or shift its weight, if you use that nose target, you can help, you know, if I'm sitting square on all 4 feet, it's harder to lift a foot. So if I shift his weight this way with the nose target, then it's easier to lift this foot. So that's part of what's happening there. Now, yes, the drawback is she bridges when his nose is off the nose target, but his foot comes up. So is that bad?
I don't know what you're trying to teach.
Yeah.
I mean, you still have some behavior you wanted.
That's the beginning stages.
Yeah, so you have to make a decision. I mean, if you did it all the time, maybe you're undoing the nose target, but you just go and retrain, or just make sure that you are reinforcing nose target more times than you're not reinforcing it. And then it's really not at risk. And it's also a behavior most animals learn from the get-go. So yeah, ideally in a perfect world, which I don't know about y'all, but I rarely have that perfect world, that you're gonna keep your nose here and bring your paw here. And also you want the animal to look and see what's happening there, and then they're kind of thinking about it and you know they're thinking about it. So I think it's a decision that is important, or it's a decision you make, but it's something to be aware of. Is like, oh yeah, they weren't on the nose target, but they lifted the foot really high. So I'm jackpotting it because I don't care about the nose target. It's not gonna go away in one response. But do pay attention to it. I hate that target. Sometimes you get something like that. He took this tiger, I don't know if, I can't remember if in the short period of time we were at this facility, if we even got him lifting his foot very much. We only had a few sessions with him. I hope the keepers kept going with it, but boy, he hated that foot target. But we did see progress to where we could actually begin to touch him with it. It just took a bit more desensitization and a gradual introduction of the foot target for him. It's also pouring down rain, for him to get over it. So that was actually pretty good for him because he felt it, he looked at it, and he didn't hiss or run away or spit on us or anything like that. So the point being, sometimes when you introduce these body targets, animals might be fearful of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means you have to take a little bit more time kind of introducing them to this tool. And again, the advantages are you get that generalization, and once they overcome the fear of it, then you can use it in a lot more scenarios. This is in a lab, obviously, but it's a nice example of introducing a foot target to a mangabey monkey. So she's using the little popsicle stick and just reaching in and touching the foot. Similar to this one, although the bear's foot is presented, so she doesn't have to reach in. So she's kind of capturing it there because the foot's already there, but starting to teach him that when that foot target touches him, good things happen. So it's kind of the same thing as with the bear, touching the foot when it's there, and then dealing with the grabby monkey problem by using a hand target as well as a foot target. just kind of see the progression of what's being reinforced. And now he's actually starting to move his foot towards the target. He was grabbing the target that time. But because he made such a big movement towards the target, she chose to reinforce it, because for the most part, he's gotten over being that aggressive grabbing that you saw initially. And anytime we talk about shaping, we have to show the happy camel dance. Some of you have seen this. This was here during one of the workshops. Day 3 of training the camel to do a 360. And she finally did it. She was super excited. And sometimes you do see, this aha moment where the animal gets what you're asking them to do. And I mean, truly, I just get super excited about it. And a lot of times you see animals get really excited too. Like they finally understand what this crazy person's trying to ask them to do. Very, very much fun. All right, so using the targets to help you get the behavior you want. In this case, like I was talking about, shifting the animal's weight so they can, for example, lift a foot better. And this is a perfect example of what you were talking about. The nose is nowhere near the nose target. Probably not so much because the animal's looking at the foot target, but because the keeper is. Her attention's on that foot. And when you work with big animals, you kind of have to do the chameleon thing where you split your eyes and look at different parts of the animal, or get really good at doing this. I've noticed in videos of, yours, your biggest, worst, best, whatever critic, whenever I watch myself train to lean in with an elephant, I'm like looking at the head and the hip and seeing where everything is. So yeah, just kind of pay attention to everything if you can. Problem, we want 1 foot. All right, so 2 feet get presented. How do we solve the problem? Use the target, put the weight on 1 foot. So now that she's standing, easier to ask for 1 foot. Simple modification can really help the animal do what you're asking them to do. This is that same monkey that you saw initially when the stick was just reaching in. And now you'll see the stick and the hand signal being presented. So switching from the stick target to the hand signal is what that was. She presents both, says this is the hand signal, but the monkey still knows the stick target, so she presents the stick and says foot, and then it would be until you just have foot. In this case, adjusting the target some to draw the monkey's leg out further. This is working towards a blood draw from the leg.
Good boy. Good boy. Good.
So touch his foot and say, bring it out here.
Sitting quite. Okay. Good boy.
Same monkey. And he actually was trained for an injection in his calf. So that's what's the objective of this particular training. Getting to extend that foot and be desensitized to the injection. Okay. Training a shoulder present on a gibbon. Big long arms, sometimes difficult to use your target to touch the shoulder. So we adjusted, instead of going for the body target, used a hand target to, well, and I should say, for those of you that don't work with primates, oftentimes we teach primates, instead of the head or the nose as their first target, they learn to touch a hand target. So that's kind of their initial target. So this gibbon had learned the hand target, would touch it anywhere. So we use the hand target to position the hand to allow the trainer to then access the shoulder. So that's what this is using that hand target to shape the shoulder. There's another gibbon working over here if you hear extra tweeting and talking.
Shoulder.
So just another way to use that target. Blood draw, very early stages of blood draw training for pigtail macaque. Teaching him to reach through and hold. He's such a good boy. He's my newest monkey love. And then the more completed part of this behavior, reaching in, holding on to a pin, which is right here, and then beginning the desensitization for blood draw. Okay. Again, sometimes the progression, the steps might be very small. So she's learning to present her ear to the target, but you can see basically no duration. And for her, duration increments were really small. So you'll see the small increase here. So there's two bridges, one for presenting the ear. For some reason, the bridge, I don't know if y'all can hear it back there, but it kind of goes on the video. It's actually the same whistle I've had forever. A little bit more duration there. So she's bridged for presenting the ear, and then asked to hold and bridge for that. And in the last one there were actually 3 bridges, 1 for presenting the ear and 2 for the duration. And of course, as the animal improves in the behavior, in this case holding, you would adjust where the bridge occurs. You're not going to bridge multiple times as you progress the behavior. You're going to start bridging maybe for the ear response, and then you don't have to bridge for the holds as often. I think some of you have seen this, but I feel like it's such a good example and a really good reminder of how we use targets, and how if you're sloppy with the targets, the animal's behavior will reflect that. And if you're careful and precise, you can get quite amazing behavior. So this was one of the hyenas here, just beginning to teach open mouth. But notice the position of the targets are inside the mouth here. And remember, an animal always moves towards the target. So you don't want to pry their mouth open with the target. You want to put the targets for an open mouth here, so they open into them. So same session, slight adjustment to the target positioning with some pretty significant results for just the first try.
Open.
See the difference? All right. Now, is anyone doing pill training here? Teaching animals to swallow pills voluntarily?
Moses?
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, this can be another kind of interesting behavior, especially if you're working with a smaller animal. I mean, elephants, you could basically drive a truck down their throat. When we were messing around with it a little bit with the giraffe, that was a whole different thing, because you've got this, the throat's way back here, so you've got a long distance to travel to get the pills in there. So it can be an interesting behavior that you have sort of your basic shaping plan, big huge open mouth, tongue extended, pop the pills in the back of the throat, reinforce swallowing. That's your basic plan. But how you tweak it for each individual or each species, different anatomy, is always a little bit of a challenge. But in a nutshell, you know, you get a nice big open mouth, you deposit the pills as far back as possible, perhaps give them some liquid to help wash them down, and reinforce the actual swallow. So this was, once you get the open mouth.
Your eyes, mouth. Mouth. Good girl, Raz. Good mouth.
So nice duration.
job, Brad.
Animal has to hold the mouth open, while in this case the eyedropper or whatever is put back there.
So that was, was it, there liquid in there?
This was just, she's just introducing just the empty syringe
Thingy.
thing, yeah. This is a bunch of steps run together with this chimpanzee. So he would do a great big open mouth, but kept his tongue pulled way back, which made it impossible to put the pills in. So he's learning to touch a tongue target, the stick. It's not to hold his tongue down, it's to actually shape his tongue sticking out so that the pills could then be deposited. So right now he's being bridged for kind of moving his tongue around and starting to bring it towards the tongue depressor. And then progressively reinforcing holding his tongue. And right now just a straw going in his mouth.
Good boy.
So he has to keep his tongue on the tongue depressor while the straw goes in.
Good. Hold. Oh, that was wonderful. That was really good. Hold. Good boy.
And again, for those of you that are interested, I think I've said this before, but when I train this behavior, I typically will use like vitamin E capsules because they're sticky and feel different to swallow, or garlic tablets for the kind of tablet feeling. You can also get empty capsules and fill them with something. We fill them with vegetable oil, but some animals like vegetable oil. So you want your pills that an animal learns to swallow to be relatively neutral tasting. If they taste good, you know, like you use, I don't know, Flintstones vitamins or whatever they are, you use some sort of chewy thing that tastes good, animal learns to chew it, then they don't want to swallow it, they just want to chew them. If you use something that tastes nasty, they bite into it, they may be less inclined to play your little game. So something that's relatively neutral is best.
If anyone's interested in this behavior, there are empty gelatin capsules in the medical supply drawer.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're using them, when I've tried using just the empty ones, they're so lightweight that they're really high, and I think they kind of stick and float around the animal's mouth. So that's why I feel like you have to fill them with something. And then they start to dissolve, so you have a limited amount of time. Unless you put rocks in them, but that would seem very nice. Something to weight them a little bit, because you kind of have to toss them in. Oh, that's right, also, with this guy, the whole tossing the pill thing, you know, he would open his mouth and tried tossing them in, but they were bouncing off his face. So the syringe that you saw is, you know, the pill popper thing for cats, where you put the pill in the end of it and push a plunger. Yeah, the pill shooter. That's what the syringe there was simulating until we got the actual pill popper.
Do you have a shaping plan for something that is supposed to be a chewable pill, but certain animals think it's disgusting, but it's like Rebecca in particular? So it's not something that they should just swallow, they are supposed to chew it.
Does it have to be pulverized in order to be effective?
I don't know for sure, but they're also very large.
Yeah.
So.
What I've done with those, like those weird meat flavored pill kind of things.
Apparently don't really taste like meat according to the bears.
Yeah. I would probably crush it and put it in one of the capsules, and then you could train pill swallowing.
You gotta do like 20 capsules at one time then.
Well, yeah, that's with bigger animals. I mean, elephants, you do handfuls.
Yeah.
You know, you can. I mean, you have to kind of go by the size of the
Yeah.
pie hole, right? But you can do multiple pills at one time once they get to that
See
point.
how many can fit in a capsule.
Yeah. Or there's also, I mean, there's huge capsules. You can get all different sizes. So put your pills in a coffee grinder and pour them up, and then stick them in something.
We don't think it's perfect.
Or, you know, the problem with breaking them, if you like break it into quarters and train them to swallow each piece, is to me when you break it, then it's kind of sharp and it might not feel that comfortable to swallow. So I think putting it in a capsule might work.
Try it.
interested in steps in separation training? We have, okay. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm getting towards the end, but. All right, so this was a group of chimpanzees, two females, mother and daughter. I'm not talking about a, suckling little wee baby that we're trying to rip from the mother. She's 28-ish, the daughter. And mom doesn't want to be separated from the daughter. Daughter could give two hoots. She doesn't care. And they're in a group with 7 other chimps. So this is Misty, the daughter. You can see she's holding on to her target. There's mom. She's right here on this little corner, which allows her to look down and see what's going on. She's the real target of the training. Mom's the real target of the training because she's the one who doesn't want to be separated. So we've got her on that little area where she can look down and see what's happening with Misty. The setup is along like 2 cages with a guillotine or a slider in the middle, and then 2 guillotines that go to their outdoor space. And so Ursula, the mom, is fine as long as she knows the door's open. The minute doors start closing, she gets nervous. So the first thing was to close the guillotine doors that keep them from going outside, and then begin to work the slider. And we position Ursula down on that end so she can see everything that's happening, because we want her to know exactly what's happening and be comfortable with all those steps. So the rest of the group doesn't matter. They can go anywhere as long as they're not interfering. The idea was station Misty, station Ursula, and then what you'll see is Ursula's trainer begins to move away from her towards the door. So he's got her on the station, asks her to hold, takes 1 step away, bridges and reinforces. And at this point, the outside doors are closed. So their only access to each other is through that slider in the middle. Okay, now he starts to take a couple of steps away from her, but he's facing her the whole time and looking at her. There's the slider, you can see. Okay, now he's starting to adjust the timing of the bridge a little bit. Just touches the door. But you can still see he's really still facing her a lot, so he's kind of like doing this, even though he's starting to reach for the door. Now he moves the door just a tiny bit. It's a perfect bridge. He bridges at that moment when he moves the door. So he's bridging when he's telling her to stay. And then he gets to the point, slides the door. At the time the door reaches the, as much as he's going to close it, bridges exactly then and goes back and opens it and goes back and reinforces her. And then just progressively closing the door a little bit more, a little bit more. And watch how his body position has changed, how he can just kind of turn and walk away from her now because she's quite comfortable with it. And from this point on, the focus of the training would be increasing duration of separation.
How would this look differently if both chimps were equally as uncomfortable being separated?
You would see a high rate of reinforcement for both of them. We might have both trainers involved in shutting the door, or at least in stepping back, because what you don't want to have happen is the distraction thing, where all of a sudden they go, ah, crap, I'm separated and I didn't want to be. So you would have to make sure that both individuals were actually seeing what happened. How you actually enacted that, I think, would depend on the situation. If it was this setup, I would probably have at least, both trainers would stand up and say, stay, and let their chimp have an opportunity to see what's happening. Whether or not both of them would have to go close the door, take turns, I think you would just have to see what the animals were doing, but that might be one thing I would do, is can either trainer walk away from the animal? And they're willing to tolerate, or they're willing to sit there and let that happen. And that's why we chose, did I say this? That's why we chose Ursula, the mom's trainer, to walk away. Because if she's willing to let her person walk towards the door and close the door, then we know she's okay with separation. If she's jumping from it every time he gets up and walks away, then she's not ready for the next steps. Or if Misty's person got up and walked away, Misty doesn't care, Ursula might be distracted and not truly buying into the process. So that's why we chose her. Do you want to see shark blood draw? Yeah, okay. Sounds hideous, so I'll turn it down. What sharks are they? Leopard sharks? Leopard sharks, I think. What is that? Who knows? It's a blurry shark. Alright, so that's their target. The first thing is they learn to touch the target. There's a pair of them that are the focus of the training. There's no bridge in use, there's just presentation of the food. And you can see he's kind of having to try to get the shark towards the target, or get the target towards the shark. Now they're starting to understand, touch that thing, get food. You see both of them coming up and taking a turn. And then the next step was to be able to handle the sharks. Once they're turned over on their back, they go into what's called tonic immobility, where they sort of go into a trance-like state. But that doesn't happen until they're a little bit relaxed. So you can see they're still fighting the manipulation, the modeling a little bit. And the idea is try to get him to relax a little bit, coming through to his hands. And relaxing with the rollover. You see it's fighting a little bit. Once it relaxes, then he releases. And in that stage, they did get food afterwards. And here you'll see food being given while upside down. And you may have noticed he had to kind of push the other one away. Like, clearly they enjoy this. So nice and relaxed, good one there. And once the animal is comfortable in that and goes into that tonic immobility, really the needle stick didn't require desensitization because they're in that state. And so the vet was able to come in and you'll see where the stick is. There's a big sinus there where they can take the blood.
So when they get flipped over like that, they have the choice to kind of relax and go into that state, or is it just like that's going to happen?
I think it's a physiological condition. I'm not sure that they have much choice over it. Maybe if they're still like, you know, early on they were fighting it and would have flipped over and rolled out of it, but once they're flipped over and somewhat relaxed, I think they kind of automatically go into it. Yeah, I think that's part, I mean, I should probably look up more and learn more about it, but I think that's kind of part of this whole tonic immobility thing is you can't help it, it just happens. Tiger blood draw. All right, it's 2 o'clock. I have, where are we? So let me just tell you what's left, and if you are interested